Well, let's talk to Brendan Chilton, CEO of the Independent Business Network, of course. Brendan, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Mike.
Now, I can't explain why I haven't spoken to you for so long. I suddenly had a conversation with Aaron the other day and I said, well, what's going on with Brendan Chilton? Let's get him on. So, very good to see you. Welcome back. And I apologise for not having you on. It's been one of those, you know, you know what's going to happen after sort of 2023. You're going to go, I don't know what happened in 2023, but it was a mad year. Yeah. It's completely crazy. You know, we had all sorts of things going on. I mean, the migrant policy and the migrant story that you and I have been talking about for years and years and years has suddenly exploded into the general sort of media arena and the public consciousness. And now the story that only we used to talk about is front page news, leading the news on ITV and the BBC. You know, why did it take them so long, do you think?
Well, I've now got something to talk to people about at dinner parties, Mike, because everyone else is talking about it as well. It don't feel so much of a sort of left-out person. I think the key issue here is, you know, the government has systematically failed to tackle this problem. As you said, Mike, now for years we've been talking about this. Yeah. A very interesting statistic for you. It is costing £5,000 a minute to house migrants coming across the Channel in hotels. And of course, at the moment, you mentioned I'm down here in Kent. Kent County Council has a legal action against the Home Office because there is a dispute at the moment over where sort of migrant children that come here alone are being accommodated. Right. And at the moment, Kent is accommodating all of them at the cost of the Kent taxpayers. I remember about 2 years ago, Kent Social Services were already in a crisis because they had too many young migrants to look after. So they must be now dealing with about 10 times that number. Well, the county council is dealing with extraordinary numbers, and it's got to make as well around £80 million worth of savings to close its budget. So it's a really precarious position for them to be in. Unfortunately, though, this problem, as you said, it shows no sign of going away, and the only way we're going to tackle this is, as you said, if we tackle the problem at source and we stop those boats entering the Channel. Whether that's in the more robust manner you suggest with, you know, potato guns popping the boats, or whether we have to have policed patrols up and down those beaches. I read this morning, actually, that the French police patrols have decreased this summer because quite a large number of French police are on leave at the same time. And so while the numbers overall are coming down gradually, that critical infrastructure, the combination of patrols, deterrence, is still not in place. And we've been talking about this now for at least 4 years. Right.
And isn't it interesting that today, of all days, just when you thought there wasn't enough to talk about with the tragedy that happened over the weekend, 6 migrants dying in the Channel, in France, a lot of people basically saying to me, well, I don't know why they ended up rescuing the people from that boat and bringing them to Britain when it happened so close to the French coast. That's another situation altogether. But now the Home Office leaked paper sort of comes out in which the Home Office, who we know is not fit for purpose, say, oh, this will go on for at least another 5 years. Well, you know, it's their job to stop it. You know, it's not their job to do a report to say we can't stop it.
Well, the Home Office, it beggars belief how that is still a government department, has been scrapped and split up because it's presided over failure after failure. It is unacceptable for them to say that this is going to be with us for years. The British people want action to happen now. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that. Again, the sinking of the boat, the 6 people that capsized in the Channel this week is just another example of how dangerous this is. And all the while these crossings are being allowed to take place, the risk of loss of human life continues. We've got these now barges that are coming up, but I understand there are problems with fire safety on those barges. I mean, really, the proverbial, you know, couldn't organise a what's it in a brewery. Yes. Really is, I think, people's views of how this government's dealing with this crisis at the moment.
But this is the trouble, isn't it? Because you've got people blaming the government for this. And yes, the government should be able to find a solution. But, you know, the reason why these people are dying in the Channel is because of unscrupulous gangsters who are running human trafficking rings and making millions and millions of pounds a day, forcing 70 people into a boat that's only really designed to hold 20, refusing to give them life jackets, refusing to do anything other than take their money and give no indication or sort of guarantee that they even get to their destination without dying. Why do these lefties not blame the traffickers? Why do they blame the government?
Well, the interesting point here, Mike, is if you remember a few years ago when we had the boat that sank, and I think about 20 or 30 people sadly drowned in the Channel, the very next day, the British government and the French government rounded up half a dozen human traffickers and did it instantly, which suggests that we may know who some of these traffickers are, in which case, why are we allowing them to be on the streets now? Round them up, clamp them in irons and throw away the key. They should not be allowed to be trafficking human cargo. It's a modern slave trade that's going on, because many of these people that arrive in Britain, unfortunately, do disappear into society, end up in low-paid jobs, sex work, drug work, etc. And so it is a modern slave trade, and it's shameful that at the moment it seems as though the British authorities and French authorities are not clamping down on these human traffickers. These human traffickers exist. They've got ID cards, they will have passports, they will have bank cards, they will have national insurance numbers or the continental equivalent. If the banks can see vast sums of money going into these people's accounts from places such as Greece and Italy and Turkey and North Africa, that is suspicious. And should warrant investigation. The bank should be working with governments in those areas to find out where that money is coming from, who these people are, and how we can get them arrested if they're committing human trafficking.
Yeah, exactly right. Because at the end of the day, the very act of being trafficked is being used by some people as a reason why they must be allowed to stay here. So it's a sort of self-fulfilling crime, which not only has as a reward at both ends, because the guy providing you with the crime in the first place gets money, you then get here having committed a crime to get here and are then given asylum because apparently you have committed a crime against. You know, the whole thing stinks, and it just seems to me, I was thinking about this on the way in today, Brendan, we just have to be cleverer, don't we? Because these asylum seekers are obviously quite clever people. The traffickers are obviously quite clever people. The lawyers that they're hiring are quite clever people. They're all getting around the law, and then once again the taxpayer is the one getting stooped.
They are, and, you know, I represent businesses. Also, businesses are being hit by this. From within 4 miles of where I'm sitting at the moment, there are 3 hotels that are full to the rafters, unable to trade commercially because the Home Office has just swooped in and said, we need these premises to house migrants crossing the Channel. And so they're unable to operate in the normal fashion as a hotel business would. And so it's not just the taxpayer that's suffering, businesses are as well. And as I mentioned earlier on, the people of Kent are paying a particular price for the problems that the county is facing. I think you're right. We do need to be cleverer at this. As we discussed before, the gang leaders were picked up once or twice before when we had the last tragedy in the Channel. The government has pumped inordinate amounts of money, essentially fortifying Calais with walls and wire fencing, and it still hasn't worked. And so perhaps the only option now, as you say, is we need much more rigorous operations on the beaches of northern France, physically stopping these boats entering the Channel. There is only a certain distance off the French coast where you can actually cross from France to Britain before you enter into much rougher seas. Yeah. If we can patrol those areas, we can stop the boats crossing.
Yeah, it's so straightforward. It always is whenever we talk to anyone with common sense. Wish you were in government, Brendan. Stay where you are, though. We've got to talk about the NHS. The doctor strikes are ongoing. Day 4, by the way, so I'm sure they're probably all, even now, thinking about maybe getting away from the pool and packing up for the day and flying back, because obviously they've all been away on long, lovely weekends in sunnier climes than here. I just want to play you a little clip from Julia's show this morning where she interviewed an NHS registrar who's on strike because apparently he wants to help the NHS get more improvements, and he also says that he doesn't make enough money. Here he goes, Benedict Phillips.
A lot of us are struggling, really struggling. My wife is a gastroenterologist, and she has to walk dogs as a second job. I've had to find an alternative income. I've had to skip meals between surgeries, skip lunches, because it's just unaffordable.
Brilliant. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, this guy should be heading up Jackanory, shouldn't he? I mean, first of all, he doesn't look very much like the sort of doctors that you would expect to see in the hospital. But if he is a registrar, we've checked this, he's on minimum 51,000 a year. If she's a gastroenterologist, she's on something around about 60. So what he's telling me is that between them, on 110,000 a year, he can't afford to pop out to the sandwich shop for an egg mayonnaise vegan special.
My heart bleeds. It really does. I wish I suffered the malnutrition that he did. It would do me the world of good. I think there is a serious argument, though, for a moment, about some of those, not just in the NHS, but also in other parts of the public sector and in business, on much lower wages than 50 or 60,000, and the tax burden that we're currently facing at the moment. I know everyone talks about inflation as a driver of the cost of living and people going on strike as a result of their wages not covering everything. If we looked at the other end of the spectrum, and if government cut taxes rather than continuing to increase them, that would also help people at the moment, and perhaps then those striking would feel as though they had more disposable income and wouldn't necessarily feel the need to strike.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the trouble is, though, that we know many doctors are not striking in the same way that many nurses during the RCN strikes of months ago were also not striking. So it's not really about the NHS. It's not really about the paying conditions. It's about a very left-wing extremist union organisation that wishes to go to war with the government. You know, one of the chiefs at the BMA was interviewed over the weekend because they've accepted a 12% pay rise in Scotland, and he was quoted as saying, "We will not accept that in England because it's a different government." I mean, those are his words, not mine. And so you know that the BMA is ideologically opposed to the Tory government. And also this story about them all threatening that they have to go to Australia to work. You know, one of the reasons that they get paid better in Australia is it's a private healthcare system. But they're quite happy to go and work in that, but they're desperately trying to stop the British healthcare system from becoming privatised. Funny that.
Well, one of the things I think we need to have a serious debate about, Mike, in this country is whether or not we can afford the NHS as it currently stands. The reality of the situation is our economy isn't growing fast enough, yet the medical needs, particularly of the elderly generation, are getting far more complex. And at the moment, we've also got a crisis in social care. And I think Wes Streeting, Labour's shadow spokesman on health, has said that an incoming Labour government would have to look to the private sector to help alleviate the backlogs in the NHS, and the next Labour government would be looking sensibly, in my view, to have more private sector involvement in healthcare delivery, because the current model, I'll say it, is not sustainable. We cannot afford the NHS as it is with our so poor and pathetic levels of growth, because the demands is far outstripping supply. I feel for anyone that feels as though they are struggling with the cost of living. I don't necessarily think the guest on Julia's show earlier on was a good example of someone struggling with the cost of living. I think we need to look at the amount people are being taxed. I think we need to look at how this government can drive growth in the economy and alternative healthcare models if we're to have this in the future.
I think an alternative healthcare model would be to strip out all of the people who work in the NHS who are not needed, who do not do clinical jobs, who are not at the front end of delivering healthcare, because the amount of money going in is prodigious. It's never been higher, 200 billion a year, and yet apparently they haven't got enough. And it's very clear to me that anybody with half a brain and a good accountant could walk straight into the NHS and deliver about probably £50 billion worth of savings overnight by stripping out all the stuff they don't need to do.
Well, the unfortunate thing, Mike, is at an election, and I say this as someone that supports the Labour Party, is the NHS becomes a football. Which party can spend more money on the NHS and therefore appear more just and noble in the eyes of the public? What a good election campaign would do is both parties saying, actually, this is how we're going to restructure the NHS, this is how we're going to bring in more private sector involvement, this is how we're going to cut out some of those non-jobs that you've just spoken about there, and this is how we're going to get a healthier society. We should have a far more grown-up debate about how we provide healthcare in this country, rather than the Tories saying, "Oh, we're going to invest 20 billion," and then Labour saying, "Oh, well, we're going to 21 billion.
Yeah.
It really is infantile. And frankly, I think the public are sick of it. All I know, Mike, is that when I want to get a GP appointment, I can't.
Yes.
Which is why I've had to go private, because our local services down here, you simply cannot get to see a GP.
Right. And that is the big problem. You know, we have a country now which is largely, shall we say, inefficiently working, if working at all. You know, we're told that it's clapped out, you know, and I mean, I know that your background is working with the Labour Party. I don't know what your view is of the Keir Starmer kind of plan, which I'll ask you about in a minute. But it seems to me that we've got a vast array of public services for which we seem to be paying more taxes and more money, but for which we're getting less in return.
I entirely agree with you. I think the general feeling in this country at the moment is we've had it. Nothing works. You can't see a GP. You can't get a train because they're not operating. You can't buy. Sometimes in shops there are mini shortages. Sometimes you can't get in to get an appointment round for someone to fix your phones or your plumbing or whatever. There is just a general malaise at the moment. And I think it comes down to several key things. We are over-regulated, we are overtaxed, we haven't got growth in the economy, and frankly, no one in politics is prepared to stand up and deliver some hard truths to the British people. Namely, there are things we can no longer afford because we haven't got the growth in our economy and we've allowed industry to be decimated, but frankly, no one's prepared to do it.
No, quite. And finally, we haven't got a great deal of time, Brendan, but Sir Keir Starmer, is he making the right noises for you? Is he convincing you that he would do a better job?
Well, I'm very pleased that he has indicated that ULEZ, or the proposed rollout of ULEZ across the country, will not happen under a Labour government. I think it's madness to be imposing...
Except in London, of course.
Except in London, yeah. So, for a different category altogether, Mike.
Yes.
but around the rest of the country, I'm pleased it's not going to be happening. You cannot tax people to net zero. And unfortunately, I think that ULEZ was the core reason why Labour didn't win the Uxbridge by-election. And if we have policies like that around the country, Labour won't win the next general election. We've got to go to where the people are, and that means we've got to support them, not tax them, and find alternative ways to make our country more green. I think we all want to live in a friendly, environmentally friendly country where we're not damaging our country, but you can't tax people to death to get there.
No, I couldn't agree more.